my name is Marek Kiczkowiak and I'm a materials writer, and I also teach academic writing.
The term native speakerism is something that we try to avoid using in language teaching. Why do you use it?
Yeah, I think, a lot of people have argued that using these terms perhaps, perpetuates some of the issues of inequality. But to be honest, in my mind, I don't really see what difference it would make if we just start calling native speakers L1 users and non-native speakers L2 users or something like this. It's a bit like, if we replace the term male and female with something else, it's not really going to do anything to the discrimination that women might face. Mm-hmm. So I kind of go for these two terms, and I put them in inverted commas to kind of remind ourselves maybe that, that who a native speaker is kind of an ideological concept and maybe a little bit difficult to define as well. But I just go with these two terms.
Okay. Why do you think coursebooks continue to use native speakerism as a model for language learners?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons. I mean, probably asking a publisher they would be able to tell you more, but from what I understand, one reason is the market demand. Same why schools hire native speakers. There is this thing that, in certain markets, people might have that, native, they want to see not just native speakers, they want to hear English people, right, from England or from London. So there's this thing, I don't know how big it is and whether actually, for example, in Voices now, in NGL coursebook, we changed it to a lot of non-native speakers. Whether that's going to affect sales, probably not. The second reason is reasons of practicality. So if you have 100 recordings in the book, and if you wanted to have 100 different accents and also kind of natural accents, not actors, I mean, it's practically impossible. It would be very expensive to do and so on. So I think publishers have, certain kind of actors they work with, and maybe 2 actors imitate 10 accents or something like this. And I think there's also this kind of status quo and inertia that it's always been done like this, and it's worked out well for us. The books are selling, so let's just continue doing what we've been doing, right?
What about pronunciation? This is something that seems to be connected to proficiency. Do you see that changing?
I think so. It's probably not something that's going to happen in a few years. It will probably take decades. It's kind of similar to other big changes, for example with discrimination of women or discrimination of people of color. It's still there, but in certain countries, the level of that has really reduced, and people are much more careful. And similarly, if you look at the BBC, you play a recording from 30 years ago, and it's all kind of one standard accent. Now you hear all sorts of accents, right? So things are kind of changing. I think it'll probably be similar here, but we need to educate, I think, the students, the teachers, materials writers, it's, teacher trainers, it's a job of the whole field, really.
So what are the important features of pronunciation?
Yeah. So the important features of pronunciation would be, all consonant sounds except the TH sound, consonant clusters, so groups of consonants together, aspiration, so that's this short burst of air when you say a word like pet, for example. It would be nuclear stress, so the most prominent stress in a given short utterance. It would be the ability to adapt your pronunciation, and also the vowel length, right? And the ones that are not really important for intelligibility would be vowel quality. We also have things like intonation, sentence stress, and then things that might actually negatively impact clear pronunciation would be features of connected speech.
Could you summarise your recommendations for teaching English pronunciation?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, one important thing for me is that I think we should introduce more variety when teaching pronunciation in terms of different accents, and I think it's really important to use non-native speakers as models of pronunciation. I think we can and should use, non-standard native speaker accents as well, so that, those native speakers, the vast majority of whom, don't speak RP or standard American, also can, they feel welcome and not excluded, right? And I think it makes it more relevant for students if they have a model of someone who's also learned English and maybe speaks the same first language as they do. And I think it's also important to distinguish between receptive and productive pronunciation. So receptive is like connected speech is important to be able to understand people, and productive pronunciation would be more, the sounds that we have to say. And one really key thing, I think, if you're writing materials or, a teacher designing materials for your students, should be progression across levels, so that, you don't teach the same pronunciation feature just with more difficult language, but try to kind of make the pronunciation itself more difficult. So to give you an example, like at a very low level, you might just teach consonant sounds. On a slightly higher level, you might combine them into clusters, like st, for example, with s and t. On a higher level, you might have three-letter consonants like str, for example, and you might like first start with consonants at the beginning of the word, then in the middle, or something like this, so that there is some progression across levels.
What about learners who may have difficulty with the pronunciation of consonant clusters? For example, a lot of Spanish speakers might say estrict instead of strict. Should teachers focus more time on correcting this?
Yeah, so I think, from what I've understood from research, saying estrict is not really going to cause any difficulties. And I mean, if somebody just is happy with that pronunciation, I think, they can just continue speaking like this, but probably, on a higher level, let's say if we get to like upper intermediate advanced, I think we should help students to not to say that that vowel eventually, that the target is to say street, right? But again, I think we should be aware, and on lower levels, students can say street, and it's absolutely fine. It'll be easy to understand, and there are perhaps more important areas that you should be focusing on.
Okay. Finally, what are your thoughts on the role of language in colonization in certain parts of the world?
Yeah. I think there's certainly, if you look at who is considered a native speaker or which accents are considered standard, native speakers really, especially in EOT, they're white and Western looking. So there's definitely that aspect of racism or colonialism and things like that. And it also happens to some native speakers of color, for example, that they're kind of forced to adopt a more standard white accent, if you will, in order to not to be discriminated, for example. So there's certainly an aspect of that.
Okay.